Aminata Sawadogo never imagined that her small bag of rice seeds would change the entire country of Burkina Faso. Born in a tiny village outside Ouagadougou, she watched her mother struggle every day to feed 7 children. The family lived in a mud house with no electricity, and meals often consisted of whatever vegetables they could grow in their small garden. When Aminata was 12 years old, a terrible drought hit their region. The family's crops died, and they had nothing to eat for days. Her younger brother became so weak that he could barely walk. That night, as she lay on her straw mat listening to her siblings cry from hunger, Aminata made a promise to herself. She would find a way to make sure no family in Burkina Faso would ever go hungry again. Her grandmother, who was known throughout the village for her wisdom, called Aminata to her side one evening. The old woman reached into a clay pot and pulled out a handful of rice seeds. These seeds were different from any rice Aminata had seen before. They were golden in color and felt heavier than regular rice. The grandmother explained that these seeds came from her own grandmother, who had received them from a trader many years ago. The rice could grow with less water than normal rice and produced much more grain per plant. But the family had been too poor and too busy surviving to ever plant them properly. Aminata took the seeds with trembling hands. She promised her grandmother that she would find a way to use them to help their family and their community. The old woman smiled and told her that she believed Aminata had the strength and intelligence to do something great with those seeds. The next morning, Aminata walked to the local school, which was just one room with no windows. She begged the teacher to let her attend classes, even though her family could not afford the small fees. The teacher, impressed by her determination, agreed to let her work in the school garden in exchange for lessons. For 3 years, Aminata studied harder than any student the teacher had ever seen. She learned to read and write in French, and she spent her free time reading every book she could find about agriculture and business. The other children sometimes laughed at her because her clothes were torn and her shoes had holes, but Aminata did not care. She had a dream, and nothing would stop her from achieving it. When she turned 15, Aminata made a decision that shocked her entire village. Instead of getting married like most girls her age, she announced that she was moving to the capital, city of Ouagadougou. She would take her grandmother's special rice seeds and find a way to grow them on a larger scale. Her parents were terrified. They had never been to the big city, and they worried that their daughter would get lost or hurt. But Aminata had already made up her mind. She packed her few belongings, including the precious rice seeds wrapped carefully in cloth, and walked the 40 kilometers to Ouagadougou. The city was overwhelming at first. Cars honked loudly on dusty roads and thousands of people rushed everywhere. Aminata had never seen so many buildings or so much activity. She found a small room to rent in the poorest part of the city, working as a cleaner in offices during the day to pay for her food and shelter. Every evening after work, Aminata would visit the city's small library. She read everything she could find about agriculture, business, and economics. She learned about successful farmers in other African countries and studied how they had built their businesses from nothing. After 6 months of research, Aminata had developed a plan. She would start small, growing her special rice on rented land outside the city. If she could prove that her rice was better than regular rice, she could gradually expand her operation. Eventually, she dreamed of building a factory that could process rice for the entire country. The biggest challenge was finding land and money to start. Banks would not lend money to a 16-year-old girl with no collateral. Landlords laughed when she asked to rent their fields. Many people told her that farming was not a business for young women, especially not for someone from such a poor family. But Aminata refused to give up. She remembered her hungry siblings and her promise to her grandmother. Every rejection only made her more determined to succeed. She knew that somewhere in this big city, there had to be someone who would believe in her dream and give her a chance to prove herself. One evening, as she walked home from the library, Aminata noticed an old man sitting alone in a small cafe. He was reading a newspaper and looked sad. Something about his expression reminded her of her grandfather, who had died when she was young. She approached his table and politely asked if she could sit down. The man introduced himself as Musa Traoré, a retired government official who had worked in the Ministry of Agriculture for 30 years. He had recently lost his wife and felt lonely in his retirement. When Aminata began telling him about her plans for rice farming, his eyes lit up with interest. Musa had seen many agricultural projects fail during his career, but there was something different about this young woman. Her knowledge impressed him and her passion was infectious. When she showed him the special rice seeds and explained their unique properties, he realized that she might have discovered something truly valuable. After talking for hours, Musa made an offer that would change both their lives. He owned a small plot of land outside the city that he had inherited from his father. If Aminata would agree to let him help her with her project, he would allow her to use the land for free. In return, she would teach him everything she had, learned about modern farming techniques. Aminata could hardly believe her luck. Finally, someone believed in her dream and was willing to help her get started. She shook Musa's hand firmly and promised that she would not disappoint him. This partnership would be the foundation of something much bigger than either of them could imagine. The first harvest exceeded all expectations. Aminata's special rice produced 3 times more grain than regular rice varieties, and it tasted better too. Local families who bought her rice came back asking for more. Word spread quickly through the neighborhoods that a young woman was growing extraordinary rice that could feed families better and for longer. Musa was amazed by the results. In his 30 years in the agriculture ministry, he had never seen rice that could grow so successfully in Burkina Faso's challenging climate. The plants needed less water, grew faster, and were more resistant to insects and diseases. He began to understand that Aminata had not just inherited good seeds, but had also discovered something that could revolutionize farming in their country. With the profits from their first harvest, Aminata convinced 3 neighboring farmers to let her rent their unused fields. She hired 5 young men from her village to help with planting and harvesting. Each new field produced the same impressive results, and demand for her rice continued to grow throughout Ouagadougou. The local markets could not keep up with orders. Restaurants started asking specifically for Aminata's rice because their customers noticed the superior taste and texture. Even the expensive hotels in the city began purchasing her rice for their wealthy guests. What had started as a small farming project was quickly becoming a serious business. After 18 months of successful harvests, Aminata faced her first major challenge. A group of established rice importers, who brought rice from other countries to sell in Burkina Faso, began to see her as a threat to their profits. These men had controlled the rice trade for many years and did not appreciate competition from a teenage girl. The leader of this group, a wealthy merchant named Ibrahim Ouedraogo, visited Aminata at her fields one afternoon. He was accompanied by 2 large men who stood silently behind him as he spoke. Ibrahim told Aminata that she was disrupting the rice business and needed to stop farming immediately. If she refused, he warned, there would be serious consequences. Aminata looked Ibrahim straight in the eyes and told him politely but firmly that she would not stop growing rice. She explained that her goal was to help feed the people of Burkina Faso, not to compete with anyone. If he wanted to import rice from other countries, that was his choice, but she would continue to grow rice locally. Ibrahim's face turned red with anger. He told her that she was just a foolish girl who did not understand business. No one would buy her rice if it became difficult to find or if the price suddenly increased. He suggested that she think carefully about his warning before making any decisions she might regret. After Ibrahim left, Musa urged Aminata to be careful. He knew that wealthy merchants had ways of making problems for people who challenged their businesses. But Aminata was not afraid. She had grown up facing much worse challenges than threats from greedy businessmen. The next week, strange things began happening. Several of Aminata's workers suddenly quit their jobs, claiming they had found better opportunities elsewhere. Customers who had been buying her rice regularly stopped coming to the market stalls where it was sold. Some of her rented fields were vandalized during the night, with young rice plants pulled up and destroyed. Instead of being discouraged, these attacks only made Aminata more determined. She realized that Ibrahim's interference proved that her Rice business was becoming successful enough to threaten established competitors. This gave her confidence that she was on the right path. Aminata decided to expand her operation in a way that would make it harder for Ibrahim to sabotage. Instead of selling rice only in local markets, she would start selling directly to restaurants, hotels, and large families. She would also begin processing her rice to make it more convenient for customers to use. With Musa's help, she rented a small warehouse in the city where she could store and package her rice properly. She bought simple machines that could clean and polish the rice to make it look more professional. She even designed her own labels with a picture of a rice plant and the words Sawadogo Premium Rice, printed in French and the local language. The direct sales strategy worked perfectly. Customers loved being able to buy high-quality rice directly from the farmer who grew it. Aminata could charge higher prices because people trusted her rice and knew it was fresh. She also started offering delivery services to hotels and restaurants, which saved them time and effort. As her business grew, Aminata began thinking about bigger opportunities. She noticed that Burkina Faso imported thousands of tons of rice every year, from Thailand, Vietnam, and other countries. This rice was expensive and not always fresh by the time it reached local stores. If she could grow enough rice locally, she could replace much of these imports and keep the money in her own country. The more she researched the rice market, the more convinced she became that Burkina Faso could become self-sufficient in rice production. The country had good soil and adequate water resources in many areas. The main problem was that most farmers grew traditional varieties that produced low yields and required too much water. Aminata began developing a plan that would change agriculture throughout Burkina Faso. She would establish a large rice processing factory that could handle grain from hundreds of farmers. She would teach other farmers how to grow her high-yield rice varieties, providing them with seeds and technical support. Eventually, the factory would process enough rice to supply the entire country and even export to neighboring nations. Traoré. Make this vision reality. Aminata knew she needed much more money than she could earn from her current farming operation. She needed investors who would believe in her plan and provide the capital necessary to build a modern rice factory. This would require convincing people that a young woman from a poor village could successfully manage a multi-million-dollar agricultural business. Musa suggested that she apply for a loan from the National Development Bank, which was supposed to support innovative agricultural projects. Together, they spent months preparing a detailed business plan that outlined every aspect of the proposed rice factory. The plan included financial projections, technical specifications, and market analysis that demonstrated the project's potential for success. When Aminata walked into the development bank wearing her best dress and carrying her business plan, the loan officers looked at her with skepticism. Most of them had never seen a business plan prepared by someone so young, and certainly not by a woman proposing such an ambitious agricultural project. The meeting did not go well. The bank officials asked many questions that seemed designed to prove that Aminata did not understand business or agriculture well enough to manage a large project. They questioned whether there was really demand for locally grown rice and whether farmers would be willing to change their traditional growing methods. After reviewing her application for several weeks, the bank rejected her loan request. The official letter stated that the project was too risky and that the applicant lacked sufficient experience in large-scale business management. They suggested that she continue with small-scale farming and perhaps reapply in a few years after gaining more experience. Aminata was disappointed but not surprised. She had expected that traditional financial institutions would not immediately embrace her vision. However, she was more determined than ever to find a way to build her rice factory. If banks would not lend her money, she would find other sources of funding for her revolutionary project. Aminata's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, an agricultural researcher from the United States, was visiting Burkina Faso to study drought-resistant crops for her university. She had heard rumors about a young farmer who was growing exceptional rice and decided to investigate. When Dr. Mitchell visited Aminata's fields, she could hardly believe what she saw. The rice plants were healthier and more productive than any she had encountered in her 20 years of research. She asked to take samples back to her laboratory for analysis, promising to share her findings with Aminata. 3 months later, Dr. Mitchell returned with exciting news. The laboratory tests confirmed that Aminata's rice had unique genetic characteristics that made it superior to most commercial varieties. The rice contained higher levels of protein and essential nutrients, grew with minimal water, and produced exceptional yields even in poor soil conditions. Dr. Mitchell explained that this rice could potentially solve food security problems not just in Burkina Faso, but throughout West Africa. She offered to help Aminata connect with international agricultural organizations and development agencies that might be interested in supporting her expansion plans. The first major breakthrough came when Dr. Mitchell introduced Aminata to the African Development Bank's Agricultural Investment Program. Unlike the local bank, this organization specifically looked for innovative projects that could transform agriculture across Africa. They were particularly interested in supporting female entrepreneurs who could demonstrate real impact in their communities. Aminata's presentation to the development bank was completely different from her previous experience. The panel of international experts asked intelligent questions about her rice varieties, her production methods, and her expansion plans. They were impressed by her knowledge and her detailed financial projections. After 3 months of evaluation, the African Development Bank approved a loan of $2 million for Aminata's rice processing factory. The loan came with technical assistance and business mentorship to help ensure the project's success. At 19 years old, Aminata had become one of the youngest entrepreneurs ever to receive such substantial funding for an agricultural project. The loan approval created a sensation in Burkina Faso's business community. Newspapers wrote stories about the village girl who had convinced international investors to fund her ambitious project. Some people praised her determination and vision, while others questioned whether someone so young could successfully manage such a large operation. Construction of the rice factory began on a 40-hectare site outside Ouagadougou. Aminata worked closely with engineers and technicians to design a facility that could process 5,000 tons of rice per month. The factory would include modern cleaning and packaging equipment, storage silos, and a quality control laboratory. While the factory was being built, Aminata traveled throughout Burkina Faso to recruit farmers who would supply rice to her facility. She organized meetings in villages across the country, explaining how farmers could increase their incomes by growing high-yield rice varieties and selling to her factory at guaranteed prices. Many farmers were initially suspicious. They had heard promises from government officials and development organizations before, but these promises rarely resulted in real benefits for rural communities. Some village elders questioned whether they should trust a young woman who claimed she could revolutionize their farming practices. Aminata addressed these concerns by offering practical demonstrations. She provided free seeds and training to farmers who were willing to try her rice varieties on small test plots. When harvest time came, these test plots consistently produced 2 to 3 times more rice than traditional varieties. Word of these successful demonstrations spread quickly through farming communities. Farmers began traveling long distances to attend Aminata's training sessions and request seeds for their own fields. Within 8 months, she had recruited over 300 farmers who committed to growing rice for her factory. The training sessions revealed that many farmers lacked basic knowledge about modern agricultural techniques. Most had never used fertilizers, pesticides, or improved seeds. They planted rice the same way their grandfathers had, without considering soil preparation, plant spacing, or water management. Aminata developed a comprehensive training program that taught farmers everything they needed to know about successful rice production. She hired agricultural technicians who visited each participating farmer regularly to provide advice and solve problems. She also established a system for providing farmers with high-quality seeds, fertilizers, and other inputs on credit. This farmer support system required significant investment, but Aminata understood that the success of her factory depended entirely on having a reliable supply of high-quality rice. If farmers failed to produce good rice, her factory would fail too. By investing in farmer education and support, she was investing in her own success. As the factory construction neared completion, Aminata faced a new challenge. The established rice importers, led by Ibrahim Ouedraogo, launched a campaign to discredit her project. They spread rumors that her factory would fail and leave farmers with unpaid debts. They claimed that imported rice was superior to locally grown rice and would always be cheaper. Some government officials also expressed skepticism about the project. They worried that if Aminata's factory failed, it would reflect poorly on Burkina Faso's investment climate and make it harder to attract future development funding. A few officials suggested that the project was too ambitious and should be scaled back to reduce risks. These criticisms made Aminata more determined to succeed. She organized a grand opening ceremony for her factory that would demonstrate its capabilities to skeptics and supporters alike. She invited government officials, business leaders, farmers, and journalists to witness the factory's first day of operations. The opening ceremony was attended by over 500 people, including the Minister of Agriculture and several international development officials. Aminata gave a speech explaining her vision of making Burkina Faso self-sufficient in rice production while providing better incomes for rural farmers. When the factory began processing its first batch of rice, the crowd watched in amazement. The modern equipment cleaned, sorted, and packaged rice faster and more efficiently than anyone had expected. The finished product looked as professional as any imported rice. But everyone knew it had been grown by local farmers using sustainable methods. The Minister of Agriculture was so impressed that he announced immediate government support for expanding the program to other regions of the country. He praised Aminata as an example of the entrepreneurial spirit that could transform Burkina Faso's economy and reduce its dependence on food imports. Within the first month of operation, the factory was processing rice faster than farmers could supply it. Demand for Aminata's locally produced rice exceeded all projections, with orders coming from supermarkets, restaurants, and institutional buyers throughout the country and neighboring nations. The success created a pleasant problem. Aminata needed to recruit many more farmers and possibly build additional factories to meet demand. What had started as a dream to help her hungry family had become a business opportunity that could transform agriculture throughout West Africa. Local newspapers began calling Aminata the Rice Queen of West Africa. International development organizations invited her to speak at conferences about successful agricultural entrepreneurship. She was featured on the cover of African Business magazine as one of the continent's most promising young entrepreneurs. But for Aminata, the real measure of success was simpler. Families across Burkina Faso now had access to affordable, nutritious rice grown by their own farmers. Rural communities had new sources of income that allowed them to build better homes, send children to school, and invest in their futures. Her childhood promise to end hunger was becoming reality. 3 years after opening her first factory, Aminata had become the largest rice producer in West Africa. Her company, Sahel Rice Industries, operated 4 processing facilities and worked with over 2,000 farmers across Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. The success had made her incredibly wealthy, but it had also created new challenges and enemies. Ibrahim Ouedraogo, the rice importer who had threatened her years earlier, was losing millions of dollars as customers switched to locally produced rice. His import business had declined by 70%, and several of his wealthy partners were demanding action to stop Aminata's expansion. Ibrahim's new strategy was more sophisticated than his earlier threats. He hired a team of lawyers and accountants to investigate Aminata's business operations, looking for any legal violations or financial irregularities they could use against her. He also began spreading rumors that her rapid success must be the result of illegal activities or foreign manipulation. The investigation created constant stress for Aminata and her team. Government inspectors visited her factories repeatedly, examining every document and questioning every procedure. Tax officials audited her books multiple times, searching for evidence of tax evasion or fraud. Environmental regulators scrutinized her farming practices, looking for any violations of agricultural or environmental laws. Despite these harassment efforts, the investigations found no evidence of wrongdoing. Aminata's business practices were completely legal and transparent. Her factories met all safety and environmental standards, Her taxes were paid in full, and her financial records were meticulously maintained by professional accountants. The failed investigations only enhanced Aminata's reputation as an honest and competent businesswoman. Government officials began to see her as a model entrepreneur who could help attract international investment to Burkina Faso. International development organizations praised her company as an example of how agricultural businesses could succeed while helping rural communities. Recognizing that she needed political protection to continue growing her business, Aminata began building relationships with key government officials. She hired local lawyers and consultants who understood the political landscape and could help her navigate regulatory challenges. She also began making strategic contributions to community development projects. Her company funded the construction of schools and farming villages, provided scholarships for rural students, and supported health clinics in remote areas. These investments created goodwill with local communities and demonstrated her commitment to social responsibility. The community investments were not just public relations gestures. Aminata genuinely believed that successful businesses had an obligation to help their communities develop and prosper. She remembered her own childhood struggles and wanted to ensure that other children had better opportunities for education and advancement. Her social impact strategy included a special program to support female farmers. Women in rural areas often had difficulty accessing land, credit, and technical assistance for farming. Aminata's company provided female farmers with special training, microfinance loans, and guaranteed markets for their rice production. This program was particularly successful because women farmers proved to be more reliable and careful than many male farmers. They were more likely to follow technical recommendations, more careful about maintaining rice quality, and more consistent about delivering their harvests on time. The success of female farmers in her program attracted attention from international women's organizations and development agencies. Aminata began receiving invitations to speak at conferences about women's economic empowerment and agricultural development. She was featured in magazines and documentaries as an example of how women could lead successful businesses while helping other women. As her public profile grew, Aminata faced a new type of challenge. Some traditional leaders in rural communities criticized her for encouraging women to become independent farmers, instead of focusing on their roles as wives and mothers. A few religious leaders claimed that her success was inappropriate for a young woman and could inspire other women to neglect their families. These criticisms were painful for Aminata because they came from people in her own culture. She respected traditional values and had no intention of undermining family structures or social traditions. At the same time, she believed that women deserved the same opportunities as men to build successful businesses and contribute to their community's development. Her response to these criticisms was characteristically practical. Instead of engaging in public debates about women's roles, she simply continued demonstrating that women could be successful in business while also being good daughters, wives, and mothers. She married her longtime partner, Musa's nephew, Seydou, in a traditional ceremony that celebrated both love and cultural values. The wedding was attended by farmers from across West Africa, government officials, business leaders, and international development experts. It became a celebration not just of Aminata's personal happiness, but of her company's success and its positive impact on rural communities. After her marriage, Aminata's business continued expanding rapidly. She opened her 5th rice processing factory in Ghana and signed agreements to begin operations in Senegal and Côte d'Ivoire. Her company was becoming a truly regional enterprise that could influence agricultural development throughout West Africa. The expansion required substantial new investment, and Aminata decided to explore partnership opportunities with international agribusiness companies. Several multinational corporations approached her with offers to buy her company or form joint ventures that would provide access to global markets and advanced technology. These offers were tempting because they promised to solve her financing challenges and accelerate her company's growth. Some of the proposed partnerships would have made her immediately wealthy beyond her wildest dreams. However, Aminata was concerned about maintaining control over her company's social mission and its commitment to helping rural farmers. After careful consideration and consultation with her advisors, Aminata decided to reject the buyout offers and instead pursue a public stock offering that would raise capital while allowing her to maintain majority ownership of the company. This decision required extensive preparation and compliance with securities regulations, but it would preserve her ability to operate the business according to her values. The initial public offering process took 18 months and required Aminata to work with investment bankers, lawyers, and accountants in major financial centers. She had to learn about stock markets, securities regulations, and investor relations while continuing to manage her rapidly growing business operations. The complexity of going public was overwhelming at times, but Aminata was determined to succeed. She hired the best professional advisors available and insisted on understanding every aspect of the process. She refused to sign any documents or make any decisions without fully comprehending their implications for her company and its stakeholders. When HFY Industries finally went public on the West African Stock Exchange, the offering was oversubscribed by more than 300%. Investors from across Africa and around the world wanted to own shares in the company that had revolutionized rice production in West Africa. The successful stock offering raised $50 million for expansion and made Aminata one of the wealthiest women in Africa. At 25 years old, she had built a company valued at over $200 million and had become a role model for entrepreneurs throughout the developing world. But Aminata's greatest satisfaction came not from her personal wealth, but from the impact her company was having on rural communities. Thousands of farmers had improved their incomes and living standards by participating in her rice production network. Hundreds of young people had found employment in her factories and support operations. Most importantly, Burkina Faso and neighboring countries were becoming self-sufficient in rice production for the first time in decades. Families were eating better, governments were saving foreign currency that had previously been spent on rice imports, and rural areas were experiencing economic growth that had been impossible under the old system of subsistence farming. By her 28th birthday, Aminata's business empire had expanded beyond anyone's imagination. HFY Industries now operated in 12 African countries and employed over 15,000 people. The company had become so successful that it was attracting attention from the highest levels of government across the continent. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso had been following Aminata's success with growing interest. As a young military leader who had taken power promising to transform his country's economy, Traoré understood the importance of supporting successful local entrepreneurs. However, he had never met Aminata personally, and knew her only through media reports and government briefings. The president's economic advisors had been urging him to establish closer ties with Aminata's company. They argued that HFY Industries had become too important to Burkina Faso's economy to operate without direct government partnership. The company's success was reducing food imports, creating jobs, and generating significant tax revenues for the national treasury. Some advisors went further, suggesting that the government should acquire a stake in the company to ensure that its benefits remained in Burkina Faso rather than being shared with foreign investors. They worried that international agribusiness corporations might eventually gain control of the company and redirect its profits away from African communities. President Traoré was intrigued by these arguments, but remained cautious. He had seen many African governments make costly mistakes by interfering with successful private businesses. At the same time, he recognized that Aminata's company had become a strategic national asset that deserved government support and protection. The fee opportunity for a meeting arose when Aminata announced plans to build her largest rice processing facility yet. The new factory would be located near Bobo-Dioulasso and would process rice from farmers throughout the southwestern region of Burkina Faso. The facility would cost $80 million and create over 3,000 jobs during construction and operation. This announcement prompted President Traoré to invite Aminata to the presidential palace for a personal meeting. The invitation surprised many people because the president rarely met with business leaders, and certainly not with entrepreneurs who had built their success independently of government support. Aminata spent weeks preparing for the meeting with President Traoré. She researched his background, his policy priorities, and his vision for Burkina Faso's development. She also prepared detailed presentations about her company's operations, its economic impact, and her plans for future expansion. When the meeting day arrived, Aminata was nervous but confident. She wore an elegant traditional dress that showed respect for Burkinabe culture while projecting professional competence. She brought with her a small delegation including her husband Seydou, her longtime mentor Moussa, and her chief financial officer. President Traoré was younger than Aminata had expected and had a serious but friendly demeanor. He was accompanied by his ministers of agriculture, finance, and economic development, along with several senior advisors. The meeting was scheduled to last 1 hour, but continued for nearly 3 hours as the discussion ranged across multiple topics. The president began by congratulating Aminata on her remarkable success and thanking her for the positive impact her company had created throughout Burkina Faso. He acknowledged that she had achieved something that many people had thought impossible, building a world-class agricultural business that competed successfully with international corporations while providing significant benefits to rural communities. Aminata responded by expressing her gratitude for the president's recognition and support. She emphasized that her company's success depended on the stability and good governance that his administration had provided. She also acknowledged the contributions of government agencies, particularly the Ministry of Agriculture, which had helped facilitate her expansion into rural areas. The substantive discussion focused on opportunities for deeper collaboration between Aminata's company and the government. President Traoré was particularly interested in her plans for expanding rice production to cover Burkina Faso's entire domestic consumption and begin significant exports to neighboring countries. Aminata presented detailed projections showing that Burkina Faso could become the largest rice producer in West Africa within 5 years, if her expansion plans succeeded. This would transform the country from a rice importer to a rice exporter, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign currency earnings annually. The president was impressed by the scope and sophistication of Aminata's plans. He had not realized that her ambitions extended far beyond building a successful business to transforming Burkina Faso into a regional agricultural powerhouse. This vision aligned perfectly with his own goals for diversifying the national economy and reducing dependence on mineral exports. However, President Traoré also expressed concerns about the challenges and risks associated with such rapid expansion. He worried about the environmental impact of large-scale rice production, the potential for disrupting traditional farming systems, and the risk that foreign competitors might attempt to undermine Aminata's success through unfair trade practices or political interference. Aminata addressed these concerns systematically. She explained her company's commitment to sustainable farming practices that improved soil health rather than depleting it. She described her programs for supporting traditional farmers while introducing modern techniques that increased productivity and incomes. Regarding competitive threats, Aminata acknowledged that her success had created powerful enemies, both within Burkina Faso and internationally. However, she argued that the best protection against these threats was continued growth and innovation that made her company too valuable and too deeply integrated into the national economy to be easily attacked. The discussion then turned to specific areas where government support could accelerate Aminata's expansion plans. She requested assistance with infrastructure development, particularly improved roads and storage facilities that would reduce transportation costs and post-harvest losses for farmers. She also asked for government backing in negotiating international trade agreements that would provide favorable access to regional markets for Burkinabe rice exports. Finally, she requested support for her research and development programs, which were developing new rice varieties specifically adapted to West African growing conditions. President Traoré was prepared to offer more support than Aminata had requested. He proposed creating a special economic zone around her new factory site that would provide tax incentives, streamlined regulations, and improved infrastructure. He also offered to establish a government investment fund that would provide low-cost financing for farmers who wanted to expand their rice production. Most significantly, the president proposed that Burkina Faso should host an international conference on agricultural transformation. with Aminata serving as the keynote speaker, and her company serving as the primary example of successful African agricultural entrepreneurship. This conference would attract agricultural investors, development organizations, and government officials from across Africa and beyond. Aminata was excited by these proposals, but also somewhat overwhelmed by their implications. The level of government support being offered would accelerate her expansion plans dramatically, but would also raise expectations and scrutiny to new levels. She would become even more visible as a symbol of African entrepreneurship and economic development. The meeting concluded with agreements to move forward on several initiatives immediately. A joint government-private sector committee would be established to coordinate infrastructure improvements around Amin,